Hello, Rafe Blackburn, National World's politics editor here in the Black Country ahead of the local elections on May the 2nd. I'm in the Express and Star's newspaper office in Wolverhampton, and later I'll be heading down the road to Dudley, where all the councillors are up for election on the 2nd of May, a key target seat for Labour. That's where Keir Starmer launched the party's local election campaign last week. But I'm here at the Express and Star offices to talk to my colleague Mark Andrews, who's the Express and Star's Black Country reporter, to get a bit of local insight on the elections coming up. So I started by asking him the main issues for the voters here in Dudley.
Dudley suffers a lot from not having a Premier League football team, not having city status, and there's a feeling that it gets overshadowed, compared to, certainly a lot of the money goes into Birmingham in this region, and then a lot of it goes into Wolverhampton, which is a similar sized town but has city status and has a Premier League football team.
And Keir Starmer launched Labour's local elections campaign in Dudley, a clear sign that Labour, hope to wrestle control of the council from the Conservatives. What are your thoughts and predictions going into the election? Do you think Labour can take it from the Conservatives?
They can. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be a very tight fight, I imagine. When we had the local elections last time, there were actually 25 seats up for grabs because one of the Labour strongholds had a by-election, so there were 2 seats in that ward. Of the 25 wards, Labour took 13, Conservatives took 12, but in terms of the wards it was 50-50 because it was 12 Labour wards, 12 Conservative wards, so it was pretty much a down the middle split. So really, if they replicate that, you'd be a fool to predict it. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but I suppose you would have to think, if you were Keir Starmer, you'd feel you're perhaps on a low at the moment, you'd be pretty hopeful, and obviously it would be a very big scalp. It would certainly be the most high profile change I'd imagine that Labour would be looking to achieve this year. I think Andy Street will probably be quite hopeful. It's obviously going to be difficult, the headwinds are against him, but he is somebody who has managed to cut across political divides, across political lines. He gets a lot of criticism from his opponents by using green leaflets. They say he underplays his though as a Conservative, that he positions himself as an independent. In his own words, he describes himself not as a Conservative mayor, but as a mayor who is a Conservative. That's how he describes himself. So I think he will be hopeful that he can differentiate himself from some of the problems that the party is having nationally. There was last year, he considered withdrawing the Conservative Party whip over the abandonment of the Northern HS2 line. He decided against that, and he's now standing as a Conservative candidate again. But I think he does like to portray himself as a bit of an independent-minded mayor, somebody who's a bit of a maverick, doesn't necessarily tell the party line. Well, the first ones you will look at will be the traditional Labour strongholds, places like West Bromwich, where Conservatives never won before. It was, I personally, even when I saw the polls, I never ever thought I would see a Conservative MP in West Bromwich. So that is something you would assume that is a must-win for Labour. That is, you cannot if the Conservatives hold on to that, they'll be in line for another big majority again. So that is one you would expect, take it for granted, that's going for Labour. Then you've got the seats, the traditional marginals, and again Dudley North will be an interesting one. That is a seat, well, it's not Dudley North, it's Dudley now, sorry. Dudley North is a seat which has always been a very marginal seat. It was very marginal Labour up until the last election, when Mark O'Longhi won it by quite a sizable majority. Now, can he hold on to that seat, or will Labour retake that? Labour's going to form next government. You'd expect they'll presumably be looking to take that seat, but Dudley's always been an interesting area in the sense it's quite a socially conservative area, a huge Brexit vote. So in the results of last year's local elections do suggest that there's still quite a bit of resistance to change in that respect. So I think Labour will be very pleased if they could take that seat, but it's all to play for. But then you've got...
What are the views of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer in this part of the world? Both leaders have quite low approval ratings. How are they seen in the Black Country?
I would say in a similar vein. I mean, one person who was very popular in the Black Country was Boris Johnson. He's very much the sort of... He could go into a pub, a brewery in Dudley or wherever and just be chatting to the locals and he'd fit in well. I think both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, they perhaps are seen as a little bit London-centric, a little bit slightly perhaps aloof. That might be unfair, but that's it. I think that possibly is the perception that some people have, that people felt that somebody like Boris Johnson speaks their language. They possibly don't feel that somebody who is identified very much as being a London figure can adapt as easily to the area, I think. And obviously Boris Johnson had the trump card. He actually worked at the Express and Star for a very brief time.
So that was some great insight there from Mark, not only about the Dudley council elections, which Labour are hopeful to take, but also the West Midlands mayoral election, where the Conservative incumbent Andy Street is hoping to beat off the Labour challenge. This is a key race, not just here in the West Midlands for voters, but also for the future of Rishi Sunak, who has been under the pump with plotters with his own party. There's talk that if he loses both the mayoral race here and the mayoral race in Tees Valley, that he could be under serious pressure from the plotters and they may try and depose him before the general election. But that is all for further down the line. Now I'm going to head down to the Dudley council offices to speak to Labour group.
Well, there's a number, as always, in these instances of both local and national politics. So you've got things such as the cost of living, the fact that in Dudley, for example, most families are about £3,000 a year worse off than they were. Locally, there's obviously the fact that this council have taken us to near bankruptcy, the fact that nearly all of the money has gone. £122 million has been taken away from residents in Dudley by the Conservative government since 2010, and those are starting to hit the impact of potholes, for example, the fact that our heritage is no longer valued. So these are the local keys that we are taking to the doorstep to say only the Labour Party can ensure that we make sure your cost of living crisis is best addressed for our fair deal for Dudley, that we can look towards how we prioritise fixing your potholes, making you feel better off, and importantly how we can actually defend your heritage, which is under threat, and importantly look after your money. We are custodians of the people of our authority, and I think that message has been lost over recent years locally.
Speaking of a general election, obviously the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer is hoping to become the next Prime Minister, and he said this country needs a decade of national renewal. A lot of people have argued that the current National Labour Party's pledges, watering down the Green Prosperity Plan, the limited funding going towards the NHS, shows lacking a bit of ambition. What would you say to those critics?
Well, firstly, I think what you need to have for any political party is a credible platform in order to be able to stand on. I think one of the complexities and one of the difficulties is we've got an economy that under the Conservative government, and there are many Prime Ministers over recent years, have literally taken this country to a situation and wasted billions and billions of pounds. Now, the positive of the Labour Party platform is it will be fully funded. And you mentioned the issue of the environmental offer, and quite openly, Keir Starmer has accepted that the economic situation has changed, so therefore the pledge needs to change as part of that. However, what is important is a commitment to the environmental agenda is absolutely consistent, and one of the platforms about how we protect our green spaces, how we look towards our green belt, whilst at the same time we look at the renewal and building affordable houses that our country so desperately needs.
Now, four years ago now, Boris Johnson came to Dudley and announced, this big levelling up agenda.
Yeah.
Do you think that has delivered for the people of Dudley? Do you think Dudley feels levelled up?
So the whole levelling up agenda is exactly links to the previous response around how we need to put trust back in politicians. What the community and the doors that we knock on, what are they absolutely fed up is politicians making promises that they cannot deliver. And that is why the Labour Party are going down that transformative route and actually saying that our programme, both nationally and locally, will be absolutely appropriately funded. Now, the whole levelling up agenda, we had Boris Johnson literally a mile from where I live, came in by helicopter and then jumped on an eco-friendly bike to show his credentials and promised the world to the people of Dudley. And he has not delivered one single penny of that. And that's where the distrust in politicians comes from, is this promise and then no delivery. What we are looking towards, both in the Labour Party in Dudley and indeed nationally, is that we will deliver what we promise. And that is why our pledges are very, very clear and are linked to exactly the financial situation that we find ourselves in, and we will prioritise accordingly.
So that was Pete Lowe, the Labour leader here in Dudley, being very clear, sounding pretty confident actually that Labour will win the election on the 2nd of May and form the next administration here. You know, he accused the Conservatives of effectively bankrupting the council, saying they made poor choices with the money, and he also basically said that the levelling up agenda, which Boris Johnson promised 4 years ago, has not made it to Dudley here. So next up, in the council building just behind me here, I'll be speaking to the Conservative leader, Patrick Harley.
Key issues, if you take away the national picture, and the good thing for us is that people are differentiating between the Westminster bubble, which isn't great at the moment for ourselves, but they're differentiating between Parliament and parliamentarians and local councillors and our track record here, and I must say Mayor Street's track record. He has his own brand. If we can all do what Andy does, happy days. But he's got his own brand. They like him, they see him as almost independent from any political party. But clearly he's a Conservative candidate, but they view him as almost the most unpolitical candidate that there is. And that goes down well on the doorstep. But what they're mentioning on the doorstep is obviously roads. They're mentioning not becoming bankrupt like Birmingham, which isn't that far from here. And, you know, when we reassure them that we are nowhere near bankruptcy, nowhere near a 114, had we not taken the steps we've taken since October and what we want to take in the next 12 to 18 months, I'm confident we'll avoid a 114. A lot of neighbouring councils won't, and they will follow Birmingham. Dudley, under our administration and my leadership, will not go down the same route as Birmingham. And I think that's what residents want to hear on the doorstep, and they're reassured about that.
You were talking a bit there about your colleague Andy Street, who's been the mayor of the West Midlands and is obviously the candidate. You know, there's been a lot of debate around how, you know, he doesn't say that he's a Conservative candidate on his Twitter account. He's been using Greenington posters. You know, as a Conservative, what do you make of that when it almost appears like he's trying to kind of discern the party?
No, I don't think it's that, but I think that Andy has his own brand, his own appeal to people. But more importantly, he's a politician. Although he probably doesn't think he's a politician, he is. He's one of the best politicians I've seen. And he does it without trying, because he doesn't try to be a politician. He's one of the most humble people I've met, but he's one of the most hardworking. And the most important thing for a politician, he delivers. You know, and I you know, as a Conservative mayor and a Conservative council leader, I've had some right arguments with Andy when I've wanted the required regeneration and investment into my borough that I lead. And I've been asked to make choices, and that's when the arguments start. But you know what? Every project I've asked that mayor to do and to fund and to find the funding, find some way to get some funding, Andy Street has found it. So you have to give him credit for his record. Every single project I've asked him to help with, he's helped. Be it in a small way or a major way, Andy Street has delivered. And that's why people like him. So whether he has a shade of green on his literature, whether he doesn't shout and bang the drum that he's a Conservative candidate, he doesn't need to. How many politicians are known by their name rather than party labelling?
Definitely true.
And that's why I think he'll win a third term.
And you know, how are the Dudley Conservatives marketing themselves at this election? Are you guys going to be following the Andy Street playbook, or are you going to be?
Well, where we are following Andy is actually leaving the Westminster bubble to the Westminster politicians, leave them to it. What we're concentrating is, like Andy Street, our record locally. Andy Street's got a fantastic record to sell to the electorate, and they're buying it in abundance. Equally, in Dudley, you've got a good record to sell.
Some fascinating comments there from Patrick about Andy Street almost avoiding being seen as a Conservative to try and get elected at the West Midlands mayoral election. But next up, I asked him about the impact social care was having on local authority finances.
And say all governments screw themselves back. Be they red, blue, yellow, a combination of whatever combination. They screw local authorities over. We are more effective at running things that change people's lives, have influence on people's everyday life. We proved that in the pandemic. We proved we could deliver PPE when the government couldn't. We proved we could make people feel safe and secure. You know, when we kept the majority of functions going, the grass still got cut, the roads were still repaired throughout the pandemic. We kept our day-to-day business going. Every other function of government ceased to a halt. Give us the money, give us the resource, we can do the jobs. We can help you to help yourself. But it's going to take a brave PM and a brave Secretary of State, and we've not seen those in the last 20 years. It's been a problem that's been growing up for 20 years through both Labour and Conservative administrations. Whoever wins the next general election has to grasp that nettle, and I would favour a cross-party consensus, one that includes a Conservative government or shadow government, and Labour government or Labour shadow government.
Do you think Rishi Sunak and Victoria Atkins are brave enough to take those decisions?
No, I don't, and I'll be quite open about that. They haven't, because they haven't proposed it so far. Blair and Brown didn't propose it, and we've had long-serving health ministers like Jeremy Hunt who didn't propose it. We had Alan Milburn for Labour previously, etc. None of them have been brave enough to propose it. Someone has to state, a national figure has to state to the health service, you have sufficient funding. It is now time to reorganise and devolve that funding so that the local authority, the social care side of a local authority almost becomes a third arm of the NHS.
And speak to my colleagues at the Express and Star, you know, they were telling me that Boris is still very popular in the West Midlands and in Dudley. Do you think that's true? Do you think the party would be doing better if he was still the leader?
Look, I think Boris is still very popular in the West Midlands. But it was always going to be short-lived. I think if he'd have shown more discipline and fired a few people for having parties or drinks or misbehaving during the pandemic, then I think he'd still be PM and probably cruising to another general election win. But he didn't have the discipline to sort out the people who were misbehaving. If you look at what he did, he didn't misbehave. But he was the guy in charge, and he didn't reprimand and discipline those that were. That's a weakness. I had a member of my group who was having family members visiting the pandemic at the very early stages where, you know, you were washing your hands every time you touched something, you weren't allowed to visit relatives, and his children were going to visit him, his adult children. Quick phone call, pack it in, well, you have another phone call, you're out. That's all it required from Boris, and I think he would have still been PM now. And I think it's a great tragedy because on the big issues, he got it right. On the small detail, he was always hopeless, you know, even as Mayor of London. With the right team around him to help him with the big issues, Boris got it spot on every time, which is why he's still very popular here. And I think people would welcome him back with open arms.
Yeah.
But he is responsible for his own downfall because he didn't pay attention to that detail. And when he found out, he didn't deal with these people who are responsible for bringing him down.
Well, that was an absolutely fascinating interview there with Patrick Harley. He's obviously quite confident that the Tories will form the next administration in some capacity. And he had quite punchy words, particularly when coming back around accusations that the council will soon go into bankruptcy. He didn't only have strong words of criticism for his opposite number, Pete Lowe. He also hit out at the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Health Secretary Victoria Atkins as to how they've handled social care, something which is obviously putting local authorities under a lot of stress. You know, he appeared to say that the Conservative candidate to be the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, was right to effectively run a campaign with no Conservative branding, and he basically seemed to imply that he was doing better because he was an independent candidate, and he also had pretty strong criticism for Boris Johnson. Certainly not pulling any punches there, and with both leaders, the Labour and the Tory leader, confident, it'll be interesting to see how this election plays out. Obviously, the Tories feel like they have the stronger ground game. Harley was pretty clear about that. And with both Labour and the Conservatives sounding fairly confident that they're going to form the next administration come the 2nd of May, it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. The Tories in particular sounded very confident with their ground game, also very bullish about Andy Street's chances. However, to hold the administration, they'll have to defy the national polls and the results of by-elections across the country, which have seen huge swings for the Tories. However, really interesting to hear how effectively the Conservatives in the West Midlands are almost acting completely separate from their colleagues in Westminster. Will that pay off at the election? It'll be fascinating to see. My name is Rafe Blackburn. I'm National World's politics editor, and you can find all of our politics coverage leading into the local election and the general election on the politics section of our website and our app. Thank you very much.